M16. Another day in Los Santos. Yeah. Tryna make a way in Los Santos. Hey, yeah. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind. Gotta get on my grind. And if you ain't talking about no money, lil'.
Alright, welcome to this KSUIE gaming fishing script tutorial. This is going to be a pretty detailed tutorial. It's going to be released over several sections. It's going to cover a lot of complex topics, and I made the tutorial videos and then I realized that it's very difficult to properly explain the use of config tables as well as the loops, and so I'm going to open this tutorial series with a PowerPoint presentation that I put together to kind of step through a config table, explain how they work for people that don't understand them, which used to be me. I'll be totally honest, it took me a long time to figure them out and to understand how they work. By the way, I want to send a quick shout out to Quest, who made the intro song that I used for this video. Thank you, Quest. You can check him out on YouTube. He's a really talented artist, and he's made what I think is probably the best Grand Theft Auto 5 song ever made by anyone. I really enjoy it. We have it as the opening music on our server when you log in, and it's pretty impressive. Anyway, thanks, Quest. So let's get into this tutorial here. Alright, so for my fishing script, I had a couple of goals. One thing that frustrates me with fishing in 5M Grand Theft Auto is you go fishing in saltwater and you catch a carp, and or you catch a goldfish, or you catch a catfish, and not a saltwater catfish. You catch a regular old, channel cat, and it makes me crazy because I'm an avid fisherman. So I'm not going to have any sort of nonsense like that in our server. So here's our goals. So we're going to create a script that determines if a player is fishing in freshwater or saltwater. We want to allow the players to purchase multiple types of rods and lures. We want to allow the players to create a baited rig by dragging a lure onto a rod. We want to create tiers of fish that the player can catch based on the rig that they're using and the location where they're fishing at. We're going to make QB inventory more robust because the default QB inventory can only take one item, combine it with one item, and return one item. We're going to expand on that later in the tutorial series. We're going to make QB inventory more robust to allow for more complex inventory crafting. I might have said that twice, I apologize. We're going to allow the player to use a fillet knife on fish in their inventory so they can actually create fillets and clean their fish, get more value for the fillets than they do for a whole fish. And we're going to allow those players to sell the fish and fillets through a QB target system on PEDs we place in the game. So that's the goals for this script that we're going to be writing. So there's several steps that we have to go through. So the first thing we're going to do is add items to the QB core share.lua. We'll do that in the next tutorial. We're going to add items to the QB shops. I'm not going to cover that because pretty much everybody knows how to do that that's done any modding. It's fairly straightforward and simple. We're going to upgrade the capabilities of QB inventory. That's a complex tutorial, and it will be the last one of the series because it's got some editing of some base files that's required, and so we're going to talk about that later. We're going to generate fishing config files. That's going to be in the next tutorial. We're going to create some polyzones. That's also in the next tutorial. We're going to write the fishing script. I believe that's in the third or fourth tutorial. And then, number 7, the goal, as always, is to release a badass fishing script. So for this tutorial, this intro, I want to explain config files, because if you're new to modding, or even if you've been doing it for a while, sometimes the config files can be very confusing. So I grabbed one of the config files that I'm going to be using in the tutorial, and this is to determine what kind of rig you can use in the various locations. So everybody's seen a config file. This is how they're laid out. But sometimes when you're scripting, it becomes rather confusing exactly what all this means. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the top section and I'm going to break it down for you so you understand whenever you're writing the code what it should look like. Okay, so taking just the top section with the baitcaster worm uh, in the freshwater, just the top 3 entries. Basically, your table in line 137 through 144 is equal to this. So you've got your config.rig.location, and then your locations are, in this particular example, we're in freshwater. So this will be freshwater while you're in the freshwater section of the table. And if you were in the coastal, it would be coastal. If you were in ocean, it would be ocean. If you were in hot zone, it would be hot zone. So you got config.rig.location, and then there's a bracket that tells it that's identified what location you're in. And then there's a .rig, because rig is our next section. And then it's going to be, your rig's going to be either a baitcaster underscore worm or a baitcaster underscore cricket, etc. And those are in brackets because that's an entry in the table. And then you have .rod, and you have your brackets for the type of rod. And then you're going to also have .lure, and that's going to be for your type of lure. So basically this is what the table looks like if you wrote it out. And there's a little bit of an error here. Let me fix that while we're working on this. So it would either be rod.baitcaster, and you would not have, for example, the worm. There would still be a bracket there. So that's one possible scenario. Or it would be .lure. You would never have both of those things at one time because it's a table, so you have to pick one from the table. So you would never have your .rod and your .lure at the same time. So this is incorrect. It would either be this, or it would be this. So that's, I tried to do it so you could see what the table looked like in one line. But again, this is not correct. Let's just delete that. It would be .rod bracket or lure bracket. All right, good enough. Okay, let's switch this. Okay, so hopefully that's a little more clear than all the talking I do in the tutorials. I'm going to hit on this again and quite a bit in the tutorial video as we progress, because it's very important. It's the key to understanding this stuff. But there you go. That's our that's basically how you can see the config file. So let's look at a specific example of how to use the config file. So here's a more simple config, and I've broken down that this config file is the same as config.fishprice bracket sardine bracket dot price bracket the price value. So basically, any of these curly brackets are a dot. Any of the equal signs are a dot. If you have a square bracket, you got to have a square bracket because that identifies a single item in the config table. And it took me a long time to understand how that works and exactly what all that means. So if you understand what I just told you and you didn't before, you are well on your way to writing some badass scripts, because this is the key to doing so. So I'm going to go through, this is going to come much later in one of the tutorials, but I wanted to step through as an intro a section of code and explain how the loops worked. And this is one of the most complex loops that's in the code that we're going to be creating in the tutorial. And this is for when the player wants to sell a fish to one of the fishmongers. So I'm going to step through each line of this code and explain exactly what's happening. And this line of code, this section of code is similar to many sections of code that you'll see when you're modding and developing. And so if you understand this small snippet of code fully, you'll be able to understand uh, a lot of things that you see whenever you're modding and developing, because we've got an opening if statement that's using a next step iteration. We've got a for loop, and then we've got a nested for loop inside of that loop. So this is a good piece of code to evaluate, and we're going to evaluate it line by line. And like I said, this is just an intro. If you stick around for the entire tutorial series, you will see how this fits into the entire program, because I will be talking about this in more detail in later videos. Um, but for the intro, I just wanted to go through line by line with a presentation, so it's a little more easy to understand. So let's start with line 43 through 49. So we'll be referencing back to this quite a bit, but this is our first one. So line 43, this is going to be unnecessary for people that have been coding for a while, but I'm going to try to step through every single line and explain it. So on the right, here we have our config table that we're going to be using for this example, and then we have our first little section of code that we're going to analyze from this total code snippet. So line 43, register server event, that just registers the event KSUIE phishing selfish as a valid event in the server. And then the event handler is going to create the function that tells the server what to do whenever it receives selfish. So yeah, whenever when the computer calls for the selfish script, this is going to tell it that we're going to be running a function, and then following this is the function that's going to happen. So line 45 is just a dev print. This is a troubleshooting print to verify the code is working, and it'll print out, because we're in the main.server Lua. It's going to print out to our console. It's not going to print to the F8 screen. It's going to print over into your TXadmin console. Line 46 is just the source variable. Since we're working server side, we have to always use source. So I just as default, I always put local src equals source. And then line 47 is your local variable defined for your player. And qbcore.functions.getPlayerSource basically gets all the information about the player. It gets the player's coordinates, their name, their inventory, their metadata, everything that is every piece of information that's packing around with your player and their table is located, is pulled whenever you do this QB core function. It grabs all of their information and puts it into a table. And it puts it into a table, basically like this, except it would be all the player's information. And so here, this is just an example of what would happen with the config.rig location freshwater. This would be config.player.name.chords. Whatever. So it puts it into that kind of data format. All right, and then we've got our local price equals 0. That's just defining a variable and setting it a default value of 0. And then line 49 starts a loop, and this is a next loop. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the player's inventory. That's what the dot items is. That's the items in their inventory. And if the player has items in his inventory, then it's not equal to nil. If he has anything, it doesn't matter what it is. And if the next item in his inventory is also not nil, then that means it's gonna take an iteration. It's gonna take a step through this if statement. All right. So there we go. That's 43 through 49. And then I'm just repeating 49 so we remember where we were at. We took an if statement, and the player has an item in his inventory, and the next item in his inventory is also not nil. So it's going to tell us that the player has items. It's going to print this to the server console. So on line 51, we're going to start our loop. And this is a for loop that's going to go through the player's inventory. So player data.items, that's every item that's in their inventory. and it's going to do that in iterations. And each iteration, K is going to equal to the item that we're evaluating, and V is going to equal player data dot items. Okay, so K is going to be a unique identifier, and V is going to be a table. So on line 52, we're going to print another dev statement so that we can evaluate everything's working correctly. And what's actually going to be output, oh, sorry, I clicked. What's actually going to be output is if we're in iteration 1, it's going to be loop base 1 looking for a fish item equals sardine, for example, if sardine was the first item that they had in their inventory. Line 53 starts our nested loop. So we have on line 51, on line 49, we said the player has an inventory item. On line 51, on the first iteration, we grabbed the first item from their inventory, and we're assuming it's a sardine for this example. And then we're ready they did have an item. The next item was a sardine. And so now we're going to loop through our config fish price, which is over here on the right. And we're going to look in config fish price for the item that is in their inventory. So for iteration 1, we're saying they had a sardine as the first item in their inventory. So on the first iteration, it's going to say, okay, they got a sardine, and then there's a sardine in fish price. And we're going to do 54 as a dev print, and the result would be the loop base. Well, it says 1, it should be loop base 2. Oh, shoot, sorry about that. Loop base 2. There we go. Put that back up. I just want to make sure this is right so that I don't confuse you any more than I already am. So line 52 is a dev print. The result for that particular dev print is going to be loop base 2 looking for a fish item. And then the dot dot is a concatenate. So dot dot is the same as using an ampersand, like say in Excel. And it's going to concatenate the player data items K. And since we are on the first loop, that's going to be a sardine, for example. And then line 53 is starting our nested loop. That's going to loop through the config fish price. Line 54 is our dev print. That's just going to say that loop base 2 searching for. Oh, I'm sorry. Holy crap. I got off of line whenever I was talking there. So that was correct because that was from line 52. Wow. Okay. I know I'm really confusing you now, and I apologize because it's not, I wanted to make this much more clear, and I'm making it clear as mud. So. All right. So we're on line 53, which is our nested loop, and it's going through the config fish price table. All right, on line 54, we're just doing a dev print to verify that we're in the second level of the loop. And then 55 is a dev print for L, which is going to be the item that we're searching in the fish price. So for example, in our sample config loop on iteration 1, it's going to return sardine for L on line 55. If we were in iteration 2, it would return anchovy. Iteration 3 would be pinfish, so on and so forth. And then the QB core debug M on line 56, that's another dev print to verify everything's working well. And you use qbcore.debug and your variable M because your variable M is a table. And if you just do print M, you're going to get an error message because it's looking for a string and it's going to receive a table. So that what it's actually going to print out would be price equals 2, because your M in this step 1 of the loop is sardine and price equals 2 is your M. So this is your L and this is your M. And that's what I tried to clarify here on this line 56 keyboard debug M, is that your M equals price equals 2. So on iteration 1, L equals sardine and M equals price equals 2. Okay? So M is a table and L is a unique identifier. So line 57 says if the player.playerData.items k, so if their sardine, because we're assuming we're on iteration 1, is not equal to nil, then we're going to step into the next step. And since we're for our example, assuming that they have a sardine, then that's going to return a true. All right, so just to reiterate, 57, we're keeping track of that, and we're step down to 58. So now we're going into another nested if statement inside the loop. And what it's looking for is if the player data dot items k dot name, and we're saying we're on iteration 1 in the player's inventory, and the first item in the player's inventory is a sardine. And we've also said from line 53, let's pop up line 53 for L and M. So on line 53, L was equal to sardine. All right. So if the player's item, number 1 in the iteration, sardine, is equal to the item that we're looking at in the fish price, which for our example is iteration 1, is a sardine, then we're going to enter into this logic because that statement is true. And it's going to do a dev print to let us know that we've, line 60 is going to do a dev print to let us know that, I'm sorry, line 59 is going to do a dev print to let us verify that we found a matching item. So we have a sardine in inventory and we have a sardine in the fish price. So yeah, line 59 is just going to give us a printout to our console telling us, yes, we found a match. So then we're going to say our price is equal to whatever the price was from the previous loops plus m.price, which would be sardine.price, which is equal to 2, times the number of items the player has in their inventory. So player.playerData.items k is sardine for this first iteration example. And so we want to know how many sardines they have in their inventory, and we're going to multiply that total by 2. All right, and then line 61 is going to remove the item from the player's inventory, and I've kind of broke it down. L is the sardine. The second statement is the amount in the player's inventory, and the K there is also sardine. So it's going to remove however many sardines they have in their inventory from their inventory. And then it's going to do a dev print to let us know we're inside the loop. It's going to give us our current price, and then it's going to go through the loop again until it comes to a point where the player has no more items in their inventory. So this is going to loop through the player's inventory, then it's going to loop through the config, it's going to look for a match, and then it's going to increase the price by the number of items the player has of each particular fish. And each time it finds a match, it's going to increase the price, and then it's going to remove all of those fish or fillets or whatever from the player's inventory, increment the price by the amount of items they had multiplied by the price for each item, and then once it's gone through the entire inventory, it's found no more matches, then it's going to end. So line 63 just ends statement from line 58. Line 64 ends the statement from line 57. Line 64 ends the if statement from line 57. That's the last one we did on the previous page. Line 65 ends the for statement from line 53. Line 66 ends the for statement from line 51. Line 68 now we've exited out of the loop and our price has incremented every time it found a fish and multiplied by the price of the fish. And so on line 68, now that we're out of the loop, we're going to report the total price to our console to verify that the right amount of money was added to the player's inventory. And so on line 68, we add all the money from all the fish that they had in their inventory to their account. And then we're going to notify them on line 69 that they sold all their fish. And then we're going to end the if statement from line 49. And then line 71 is going to end the selfish function because the selfish function is complete. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. I think it was less confusing than what I'm going to be talking about in the additional tutorials. But if you found that informational, please give me a like. And if you found that informational, then I think you'll enjoy this tutorial series. If you knew everything that I just talked about already, then you should probably go do something else because you're going to learn nothing from this tutorial. Um, but if everything I just explained is kind of better clarification for you on how the config files work and how the loops work, then you're going to get a lot out of this tutorial series, I believe. So thanks for tuning in. I'm going to have all the tutorials loaded, so you should have it in a playlist if you found this one. And you can just step through, and we're going to walk through this entire process of creating a badass phishing script. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, it's M16. Brr. Another day in Los Santos. Hey, tryna make a way in Los Santos. Hey, yeah. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind. Gotta get on my grind. And if you ain't talking about no money, little homie, I ain't even got time. Another day in Los Santos. Tryna make a way in Los Santos. Yeah, another day in Los Santos. I gotta make a way in Los Santos. Look, I'm about my cash. Weasel on top, cause you know we get the bag. M16, never fold, never drag. Tryna make the city out and put us all on the map, no cap. And you know that's the truth. Hit me if you need a track, cause I stay up in the booth. In the city where it's gritty, but your dreams come true. Everybody on their grind, and that's something I salute. Yeah, I told y'all I'ma make it. On my soul, I'm too real, I can't fake shit. All the love that y'all show is amazing. Gotta be on top, cause I came from the basement. 16. Wake up every morning, I got money on my mind.